Hello, welcome to week 4. So we are continuing to work on your classical arguments. As a reminder, this week is the first week of workshopping on that argument. So here's the basic way that works. You will need to submit a draft to the team discussion thread for your team. Okay, you can do this by attaching it as a file attachment to a message, and it'll be up to your teammates to read the paper and give you your feedback in the thread, so that we can make sure everybody gets their feedback, everybody gets a chance to see it. Okay. All right. So what we're going to look at this week is we talked briefly about inductive versus deductive reasoning before. We're going to look a little bit more closely at the difference between these two. Okay. All right. So first off, basically, what's the difference? Let's review that. Inductive reasoning is performed by crafting a conclusion based on the existing evidence. Rather than seeking out evidence which backs up a pre-existing conclusion you want to reach, instead you adjust your conclusion to match what actual facts exist. Okay. This is really what you do 95% of the time when you do research papers. You're finding an inductive thesis that matches the research that you've done. Now, this is less commonly used in most argument essays because arguments are usually set prior to performing research. Okay? So, you're primarily, when you're using inductive reasoning, you are going to generate your thesis from the research that you perform. That is, say, the research is going to influence the way you're going to write it. Okay? As opposed to deductive reasoning, which works backward from the conclusion, looking for evidence which justifies that conclusion. The facts you are seeking are the ones which will prove your argument. Okay? So primarily what you are looking at here is you're angling your research so that you find what supports your argument. Now, this is a more common style of reasoning used for arguments, and it can be seen as slightly easier to deal with, as having a conclusion to focus on helps to focus research tighter. Okay, it allows you to be more clear in terms of what it is you're looking for and how you're going to go about performing your research. Okay, so inductive, deductive reasoning, these are the two primary styles of reasoning used in classical arguments. Alright, so inductive reasoning. The organization of an inductive reasoning essay typically follows a few guidelines. One thing, it demonstrates the relevance of the topic. Okay, the topic has to be something that is going to affect people. It's relevant in the current day and age. It is relevant to your rhetorical circumstances, to your situation. It is going to be something that's going to be ultimately relevant to your audience. It's going to state the main argument and claims clearly. Okay, you need to have a good idea of what your argument is. You have to state it very clearly for your audience. They need to be able to follow your logic along with you. This can sometimes be difficult to do, especially if people write in an esoteric style, or if people are writing about something that's not exactly a clear-cut argument. Okay, so just make sure that you are following this guideline and stating your argument clearly. Okay. Arrange evidence that best supports the main conclusion. Okay. Typically speaking, you want to try to build up to your best piece of evidence. Okay. So start with evidence that maybe isn't quite as strong, but is still enough that it's going to back up your point. Okay. And build it up, build up, build up until you get to your strongest piece of evidence, which is going to be irrefutable and what's going to be your slam dunk. Okay. And then you need to interpret and analyze the evidence for the audience. Okay, you're going to be doing a little bit of the work for them, but at the same time, you're going to be guiding them in the direction of the argument you want to make. Okay, so you're going to present your interpretation and your analysis of what you're seeing in that evidence. Okay, it's a very commonplace practice in research papers. Let's look at the important points and how to handle each one in context. So, starting with relevance. Okay. You have to show how your argument, and on a smaller scale, a piece of evidence you are presenting, is relevant to the overall topic of the argument. At a relevant point is only going to act as signal noise. Okay, so you need to find research that's going to pretty much completely apply to your argument, apply to what you're trying to prove. It has to apply completely to the circumstances of the situation that you're writing about. It has to apply to the topic, apply to the argument. Okay. I have an example of some a brief research exercise that I'm going to have you guys trying to do. Okay. This is going to be a really brief exercise. It takes about 10 minutes. As long as you have the slides with you, as long as you're following along with them, you will be able to take a look at these and see what we're talking about in terms of the research. Okay, so you're writing an inductive reasoned argument about election procedures and want to use the 2020 Iowa caucuses as part of your evidence. Okay, you may recall from the beginning of the year there was a lot of kerfuffle regarding the Iowa caucuses because they had some trouble reporting the results. Okay, we're not looking at the candidates that we're running. We're strictly looking at the procedures that were used by the election officials. Okay. What you're going to be doing is looking at the 4 articles that I've got linked here and determining which one of these is least likely to match up with the thesis statement about the importance of having a backup plan for election security. Okay, we have 4 articles here. One's from the Des Moines Register, which is the Iowa newspaper. One of them is from NPR, National Public Radio. One of them is from the New York Times, and one of them is from Politico. Okay, I'm going to give you 10 minutes. I want you to read over the articles, and under the lecture exercises thread in questions to the professor, you're going to submit your discussion of the articles and which one you feel is the least relevant to the topic and why it's the least relevant. Okay, so take 10 minutes, look over these. I will briefly click on them here to illustrate what you are looking at. Okay, everyone has had a chance to take a look at the articles and give their impression of which one was the which one was the least useful for the topic. Okay, we're going to move on to talking about arranging evidence and interpretation. Okay, so this is talking about our organization of our evidence. Okay, when you have the evidence to prove your point, it comes time to arrange it so that it's in the best, most logical order to support your main argument and your conclusion. Okay, so you want to have it in the best order for the reader to comprehend what it is you're trying to say. You also want to make sure that the reader is going to be on your side and keeping up with you with this evidence. Okay, so it has to be in a logical progression, something that's going to be comfortable for the reader. Okay, there also needs to be an explanation to the significance of every piece of evidence you present. Okay, you must show why the facts point to your conclusion being the correct one. So, all the point of this evidence gathering is to find the support you need for your reasonings and for your eventual conclusion that this is the argument I want to make. Okay, so to put this into practice, we're going to come back to our news articles from the previous slide. Okay, so you picked out the one that was the least applicable. Okay, of the three articles you felt were the most applicable to the election security topic, you want to choose facts from the articles that back up a thesis statement summarized as competent election security is vital to preserving an individual citizen's right to vote and have their voice heard in their government. Okay, so that's what you're going to do next here, and this is also going to go into that same questions of professor thread. So decide how you would arrange the facts you've pulled from the articles to support this thesis statement in a logical fashion. The usual method is to place the most compelling piece of evidence first, then in descending order in terms of strength. Okay? Or you could start with the weakest and build up to the strongest, whatever you feel your readers are going to be more comfortable with. Okay? And discuss how you would justify including each fact you present. What is the overall meaning of that piece of evidence in context with the thesis? Okay? What point does it make to prove the thesis correct? How is it going to apply to that thesis and enhance it to the point where, okay, this is something that I'm not going to question. Okay? I want you to take another 10 minutes or so, pause this lecture, take a look at the articles and try to pick out the pieces of evidence that are going to work for the purposes of this exercise. Okay? Find the facts that back up that thesis and decide how you're going to arrange them and justify them. Okay? Another 10 minutes to go ahead and work on that. All right, and we're back now. Okay, so you've taken your 10 minutes here and you've tried to arrange your evidence. Okay, now we're going to go into deductive reasoning. Okay, so the construction of a deductive reasoning argument typically works backward from the main conclusion. It goes generally through a certain process. So that process goes identify the conclusion, examine your reasons, and then formulate the premise. Okay? So first off, identify what conclusion it is that you want to reach. What is the argument you want to make? Okay? Second, examine your reasons. Okay, why is it that you feel that way about that argument? Okay, what makes you believe that that's correct? And then formulate the premise. How are you going to present the premise of your conclusion? What are you going to do to present it in a way that's going to be acceptable and also in a way that it can be debated? Okay? So once again, we're going to go through these steps to get a handle of them, and we're going to be doing more work with the previous articles and the election security topic. Okay, so we're still going with those articles that we were looking at before. Okay, so starting off, we're going to identify the conclusion and examine your reasons. Okay, this is basically the whole meat of your argument, right? You want to make this the central point of your essay as you continue to debate the opposition throughout it. Okay, so as you go along with your essay, this is how you're going to engage with the opposition, is by using your reasoning and your evidence to prove yourself right and to prove them wrong. Okay, once you have identified your main conclusion, then you'll need to look at why you've reached that conclusion. So what is the reasoning behind it? This includes your reasons for your argument and how you justify thinking that way. Okay, so not only is it the reasoning, but it's also the evidence that you're using to prove it correct. Right now, I want you to use the inductive reasoning exercises that you were just doing, and based on those alone, construct a conclusion you want to make. Okay? Use any notes that you have taken on those articles. Okay? Or you can just read through the articles again and make some notes about them. Okay? But from using that as the basis, I want you to construct a argument that you can make about election security. Okay? Or any kind of argument you want to make based on those articles. Okay? From that conclusion, then you're going to construct your reasons for its support. So think critically about all of the possible reasons there could be for coming to that conclusion based on the evidence you have before you. At this point, you can also search for more evidence on the topic. Okay? I'm going to have you do this one as a journal exercise, so you do not have to share this one publicly. This doesn't go into questions professor, mainly because this is calling for a longer form answer. So what you're going to wind up doing is, if you follow through with this exercise, what you're going to wind up doing is writing out an argument, okay? A base argument, and finding the reasoning that backs that argument up, okay? And you're going to be writing it in sort of a list form, where you have the main argument at the top of the list and all your reasons list below it, okay? Again, think critically about all the possible reasons there could be for coming to that conclusion based on the evidence that you have, okay? I'm going to give you slightly longer in this one. I'll give you 15 minutes to do this, and then we will resume. right, and we're back. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to be doing with this argument is formulating the premise. Okay, this is going to be the basic principle on which you will base your argument. Now, if you do this right, this is where you will find common ground between yourself and your audience. Okay, your argument is going to be what brings you together with the audience. You have to be able to find some bridge that you can make between yourself and the people you're talking to. This is where the concept of syllogism is useful. We talked about syllogism before. Major premise X, minor premise Y, therefore major premise X is proven. Okay? The structure of syllogism is perfect for composing major and minor premises for the purposes of proving an argument. If you are able to construct a syllogism for your main problem and conclusion, it will be easier to construct the full argument as the structure is similar. Let's take a look at a few examples of syllogism. Okay. So the main basics of let's see. There's a good example of syllogism in the textbook. It's going to be under the section on deductive reasoning. Okay, and it's under a section actually called Formulate the Premise. So here is the syllogism they have in the textbook. All people should have access to a high-quality education in their quest for a healthy, happy life. Income and social status should not determine one's access to education. Therefore, college should be free for all citizens. Okay? So, you see there the major premise there. Okay? All people should have access to a high-quality education. Okay? That's the basis of your main premise there. The minor premise, okay? Income and social status should not determine one's access to education, okay? So that leads to the conclusion, which is confirming both being correct. Therefore, college should be free for all citizens, okay? That's the basics of how to use syllogism here, okay? You can try to apply this to this circumstance, which is what I kind of want you to do right now. And this is going to be an opportunity to try to work together with your teams. Okay? Under the team discussion threads, okay, in addition to workshop stuff that you're doing this week, there's one other exercise I'd like you guys to do under that thread. Take some time to construct a working syllogism for your team's take on election security. Okay? Come together with your teammates and try to and using what you have written in your journals, I want you guys to come up with a general argument that you want to make about election security based on these articles. Okay? So for the purposes of this, don't worry about your evidence. Instead, I want you to just focus solely on what premise you think would be easiest to prove and find a logical means to prove it. Okay? So you guys are going to be coming up with your syllogism for an argument here, a major premise and then a minor premise, and how they both come together to reach your conclusion. Okay. All right. So I'm not going to have you guys pause the video for this because it's going to take some time to get your teams together. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and press ahead. Let's talk about the base structure of argument. Okay, we talked about the framework of it last week. This week, the structure is of the argument itself, not necessarily the essay. Okay, so when you are coming up with your argument, this is the main structure that you want to use. It should include an introduction where you state the problem and use whatever hook you need to gain the audience's attention. Okay. You should have a main premise, where you present and explain the main premise you are using as the basis for your argument. At this point, you should also present the conclusion you intend to reach. Okay? So the main thing that you are trying to argue and the conclusion you want to achieve. That is to say, what should be done or what action has to be taken or what the actual truth that you feel is. Okay? Then you have reasons. Why you support the proposition. At this point, also address counter arguments. Okay? Look at what your opposition is saying in relation to this. Okay? Find a way to address those counter arguments and refute them. Okay? And then finally get to the conclusion, where you restate your main conclusion with a summary of the evidence presented which proves it. Okay? Remind your readers of the main premise. Don't let them lose sight of the fact that you have a main premise that you are working with. And then leave a lasting impression. Use some of those techniques we talked about last week for conclusions to try to drive home for your audience what the main point you want to make is. Okay? Now, once again, we're going to talk briefly about the workshop week. Okay, here is how it's going to work. Okay, so this is our workshop on the scholarship essays. Okay, it's not scholarship essays. This is the workshop on your classical arguments. Okay, scholarship essays is for 1301. That's my bad. Okay. This is how you're going to work. You're going to upload a rough draft to your team's discussion thread on the discussion board. Okay, start up a reply and attach a file. Okay, you will be sharing it with your team and getting feedback from your teammates. Okay, every member of the team must post revision feedback on every essay. Please remember, your teammates are depending on you. They need that feedback. They want you to give them some idea of what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong. Okay. There is one tip I want to give you guys. Post your feedback as a direct reply to your teammate's essay. Upload the essay as a reply to the thread, then reply to the upload to give feedback. Okay, it will nest that way if you want if you do that. Okay, and it'll be a little easier to keep track of which feedback goes to which essay. Okay. There are some requirements here. You must post a draft to your team's discussion board on eCampus. Okay. At this point, a revision is going to be about ideas, so I'm not expecting anything too spectacular. I do say that you must post a draft. Okay. Everybody has to have something in order to workshop. Okay. You also must check the discussion board to find drafts and offer feedback. Okay. So you need to check back to make sure that your teammates have posted their drafts, and then read their papers and offer them feedback. Okay. So, as I mentioned, this is a revision workshop. So your feedback is going to be focusing on the content of the essay, not the proofreading or grammar elements. That's next week. Okay. This week we're focusing strictly on content. Okay. So that would include organization. That would include readability. That would include focus. And that includes some specific things for this argument. Okay? Is the subject well analyzed? Is there enough detail there so that you understand what the subject is talking about, or the subject that the writer's talking about, and you have a good grasp as to why the argument is important within that subject? Okay? Are the claims supported sufficiently and appropriately? Do the claims make sense firstly? Okay. Are you looking at the claims saying, where is this coming from? This seems like it's coming from left field. Or are you looking at them saying, yeah, I can kind of see where you're coming from. I can understand that. Okay. Are those claims supported well enough? Do they have enough facts behind them to justify their inclusion? Okay. One other thing to make note of here is, are those facts well cited? Okay, can you refer to where they got that factual information from so that you can double check their work? Okay. Also, is there a clear thesis statement? Can you tell what the point is of the essay, why they wrote it, and what their argument is? Okay, is there a thesis that they are working from, or does it seem just like a mishmash of different argument pieces and elements that probably don't belong together? Okay, so these are all the things that you need to be looking for when you're doing your feedback. And just in general, for workshop etiquette, one of the better ways to get people to listen to you is to start off your critique by telling them something they're doing right. Okay, throw them a little bone, and they're more willing to listen to you when you try to tell them what they're doing wrong. Okay, so give them a little bit. Give a little bit of positivity before you get into, okay, this is why this paper is terrible. Okay? Tell them something that you like about it. Tell them something that you think works. Okay? Now, one thing I wanted to do before the end of this video is I wanted to give you guys a few examples of syllogism so that you have a better idea and a better concept as to what we're talking about in this particular term. Alright, so this is a video from a site called Critical Thinker Academy. It's giving an example of hypothetical syllogism, which is what we're working with in terms of logical exercises and argument. So let's take a look.
Before we move on to the invalid forms, here's one more valid conditional form that you should know. It's sometimes called hypothetical syllogism or hypothetical argument, or more informally, it's sometimes called reasoning in a chain. It's obvious why it's called this when you see the argument form in action. This is hypothetical syllogism, or reasoning in a chain. It's what you get when you chain a series of conditionals together, where the consequent of one becomes the antecedent of another. You can chain as many of these together as you like. Note that both the premises and the conclusion are conditionals. In this argument form, we're never actually asserting that A or B or C is true. All we're asserting is a set of hypothetical relationships. If A was true, then B would follow. And if B was true, then C would follow. And from this we can assert that if A was true, then C would follow. In logic and mathematics, this kind of relationship is called a transitive relationship. Some relationships are transitive and some aren't. Tallness, for example, is transitive. If Andrew is taller than Brian, and Brian is taller than Chris, then Andrew must be taller than Chris. On the other hand, being, say, an object of admiration is not transitive. If Andrew admires Brian, and Brian admires Chris, there's no guarantee that Andrew will admire Chris. At any rate, what this argument form shows is that the relation of logical implication is transitive. If A logically implies B and B logically implies C, then A logically implies C. This argument form is often used to represent chains of cause and effect, like in this example. If we assume that hitting the cue ball will cause the red ball to hit the blue ball in a certain way, and if the red ball hitting the blue ball in this way causes the blue ball to go into the pocket, then we can say that if we hit the cue ball in this certain way, the blue ball will go into the pocket. This is precisely the kind of reasoning that a pool player is doing when they're setting up a combination shot like this. You have to reason through a chain of conditionals to figure out how to best strike the cue ball. It should be obvious, but in case it's not, you can also use this form to generate a modus ponens argument. In this example, we can see that the argument is valid, but we're actually using hypothetical syllogism in our head to derive a necessary premise. From premises 1 and 2, we get the assumed premise, if A then C. Then from this new premise, plus the affirmation of A, we can derive C using modus ponens. Now, the order of the terms is important. The argument form above, for example, is not valid. This is arguing backwards with conditionals. The direction of logical dependency doesn't work this way. We'll talk about this more in the next tutorial. The key point is that with conditionals, the only valid inference is from antecedent to consequent. You can't go the other way. So just to summarize, this is a no-no. Here's an example. Let's assume the following conditionals are true. If John studies hard, then he'll pass the test. If he passes the test, then he'll pass the class. Now assume that John does indeed pass the class. Does it follow with deductive certainty that John studied hard for that test? No, it doesn't. Maybe the teacher gave him a very easy test that day that John could pass without studying hard. Maybe he bribed the teacher to pass him. There are lots of possible ways that these premises could be true and the conclusion still false. On the other hand, if we knew that he studied hard for the test, we could validly infer that he passed the class. That would be the valid form of reasoning in a chain.
You kind of see how syllogism works there, okay? You're basically using your premises to try to reach a conclusion. You can't go start with the conclusion and go backward. You have to start with a main premise, go to a minor premise, and then to that conclusion, okay? As he says, reasoning in a chain, okay? All right, so that's it for this week. I know it was another short lecture, but mainly I want you guys to be working on these argument essays. I want to make sure that I give you guys a chance to workshop it plenty in the next couple of weeks, okay? So that you are ready to turn in a completed and excellent classical argument next week, okay? Just as a reminder, that's what's coming up next week. You have the due date for it, okay? I will actually, for this week's Blackboard session, for the Collaborate session, I will get some questions anybody may have in regards to workshopping etiquette, anything that they want to bring up in terms of issues they're having with workshopping, issues they're having with writing the essays, okay? I am more than happy to answer any questions that people have about that. Okay, so with that in mind, we'll go ahead and conclude things for now, and I will see you guys next week with another one of these lectures. I will see you then.